The requirements and rewards of implementing a Part 141 flight school program by Cassandra Marin. Part 141 is a section of the Code of Federal Regulations that falls under Title 14. This addresses regulations pertaining to aeronautics and space. These regulations discuss the manner in which flight training is carried out. Part 61 discusses the requirements that must be met in regards to the testing and certification of airmen, but schools that provide training under this part may provide training in any way they wish to, so long as their students can pass the check ride. When we say that a school is Part 141 certified, this means the school underwent the application process with the Federal Aviation Administration and is capable of meeting the requirements set forth. These schools subject themselves to scheduled audits and random inspections to ensure they are complying with these regulations. In the early days of the aviation industry, flight training consisted of building an aircraft and then trying to learn how to fly it on your own. The Wright brothers provided the first flight lessons to civilians. They used their Model A aircraft, which is the first two-seat airplane. The instructor gradually handed over control to the student until they could do everything on their own, from taking off until landing. Glenn Curtis also offered flight lessons to civilians, and he required ground school before the very first flight even took place. Both Mr. Curtis and the Wright brothers initially focused their training on flight exhibition teams and then military customers before turning their attention to the public that wanted to learn to fly, but it was these early pioneers who laid the foundation for what civilian flight training consists of today. The Air Commerce Act in 1926 established the first regulations in aviation, and prior to this, the government actually had no role within the aviation industry. The flight school must have continuous use of all airports in which flight training operations may originate from. They must also have at least one runway available for airplanes to take off from at maximum gross weight, with wind conditions of 5 miles per hour or less, and temperatures equal to the average of the hottest month of the year. The aircraft must be able to clear all obstacles by at least 50 feet in such conditions. The aircraft that a flight school uses must have 2 pilot stations, be a civil aircraft of the United States, must have standard airworthiness certificate, and be maintained in accordance to Part 91. Part 141 certified flight schools must also have a primary business office with the facilities and equipment necessary to preserve records required to operate the school as a business, and they also must have a mailing address for the office named on the pilot school certificate. Another important requirement is that the principal business office may not be shared with or used by another pilot school. The flight school must also have a briefing area that is not shared with any other school. In addition, prior to approval for a Part 141 certification, the flight school must submit a training syllabus and training course outcomes to the FAA. They must also prove a successful passing rate of their students by having graduated at least 10 different people from the provisional pilot training school's approved training courses within the past 24 calendar months and have established at least an 80% pass rate on the first attempt for all knowledge tests leading to a certificate. Regardless of the flight school certification, there are several topics which should be addressed in a pilot's training. Pilots should know how they function within the cockpit, how the aircraft performs within its environment, and what some of the risks and variables can be within that environment. With this knowledge, pilots will be able to react in appropriate manners to all forms of stress that they may be subjected to. Fatigue is an issue that tends to show itself as a contributing factor in many accident investigations. Pilots should have an understanding of the significant drop in performance when they are fatigued. The thought process slows down, and the pilot may not take the time to carefully consider his actions within the cockpit and take unnecessary risks. Hypoxia is another condition that severely affects the thought process. The brain cannot function properly because there is a lack of oxygen flowing to it. The typical cause of this in aviation is the lower air density as an aircraft ascends into a thinner atmosphere. A pilot will not be able to breathe in the same amount of volume of air as usual as altitude increases. Low oxygen levels within the body can affect a pilot's sight, especially at night, and they may not be capable of recognizing a dangerous situation. The hazardous attitudes of pilots may include anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, machismo, and resignation. Pilots should be taught what the characteristics and risks are for these hazardous attitudes, in addition to their antidotes. Pilots also need to be made aware of their resources, so even if they do not know what to do in an emergency situation, they will know where to find the answer. All aircraft have specifications, such as appropriate speeds and maneuvering abilities. Training must be provided as to what those specifications are for the aircraft they will be flying in. This way, the student pilot will know how to properly load an aircraft, how to avoid overstressing the aircraft frame and flight surfaces, and how to follow emergency checklists specific to the aircraft. Meteorology is a topic that is critical to a pilot's knowledge as well. They must be informed on the various risks associated with the different types of weather they may encounter, and have an understanding of how to mitigate risks. Example of dangerous weather-related conditions can include flying too close to thunderstorms and recognizing when icing may occur. All aviation businesses need to stay up to date with advisory circulars, airworthiness directives, notices to airmen, and temporary flight restrictions in order to be as educated as possible, mitigate unnecessary risks, and comply with all requirements to carry out flight operations. A good pilot will continue in the learning process throughout their career. The National Transportation Safety Bureau website allows anyone to view investigations into prior accidents. They can also see what type of recommendations the NTSB has made to the Federal Aviation Administration and the resulting changes in those regulations. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association has incentives for pilots to complete continuing education courses and provides some very interesting topics in order to keep those who fly as informed as possible. After speaking with several aircraft insurance agents, I have established which part of the CFRs a flight school is certified under does not necessarily affect their premiums or their coverages under their insurance company. There is no real benefit here in regards to becoming Part 141 certified, as they tend only to look at the type of aircraft being used for training, its age, the type of training that is being provided in it, and who is allowed to fly it. In regards to making the decision to become Part 141 certified or not, a flight school should consider local factors in addition to the requirements of the FAA. They will want to have a good understanding of what the local population demographics are, to see who their potential flight students can be, and if they can expand their student base by acquiring certification. If the flight school is in an area where many military veterans live, it may be worth it to seek 141 certification, as only these schools can accept veterans benefits programs. The school will also want to reflect upon common weather patterns in the area. Areas with very predictable, mild weather will be able to conduct flight training many more days of the year than a flight school that encounters freezing rain and high winds. The local terrain is also a factor, as flight schools must adjust their training to their environments. A flight school at an airport with an elevation of over 6,000 feet and mountainous terrain will have somewhat different training method than a flight school based at sea level with very flat surroundings. In calling local flight schools, most of them want to become Part 141 certified specifically so they can accept veterans benefits. Some of the flight schools also cited that they expect to see an increase in the amount of students they teach, and that more of the students will be full-time students on their way to making a career out of flying, rather than simply pursuing it as a hobby. In addition, future employers of the students who undergo training at Part 141 flight schools can be assured that they received training which followed a specific course syllabus. Finally, many potential flight students may choose to conduct their training under a Part 141 flight school, as the compliance with numerous FAA regulations may make the flight school appear more professional and accountable. The application process to become Part 141 certified is not all that complicated once the school can assure they are in compliance with all of the regulations under the Part 141. Basically, the school must submit a letter of intent to the FAA and then provide a syllabus for their flight training to the FAA to review as well. They also must undergo scheduled audits and comply with random inspections in order to be able to maintain their certification. If there are any Part 61 flight schools out there that desire to become Part 141 certified, the FSIMS website, Flight Standards Information System, can provide access to documents used during a Part 141 inspection. And the Gleim Aviation Part 141 application tool is a fantastic resource that will guide a Part 141 applicant through the entire process. As an overview, each flight school is different and must consider many factors before determining if they should pursue a Part 141 certification. There are many factors that are not affected by becoming Part 141 certified, as regulations regarding what airmen are tested on in order to achieve a license or rating are the same in both cases, and there are no benefits in regards to insurance purposes to becoming Part 141 certified. It really depends on the type of students the flight school is trying to attract and the local conditions to determine if applying for a Part 141 certification will be worth the trouble in the end.